Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is part 2 of my most asked plant related questions on social media. So part 1 is already up. If you haven't seen it already, I'll pop a link up here. So when I filmed that video, I originally just filmed all of this together and then I realized that it was way too long. So I've split it into 2. So this is part 2. So this is the remaining questions that I had and the answers. So hopefully this is helpful to some of you, and yeah, we'll get started. Another question that I see talked about a lot on social media is about Brazil and reversion or full yellow leaves. So I quite often see comments about Philodendron Brazil and people getting really worried because their plant is just putting out full yellow leaves. Kind of response to that is, firstly, don't be too worried. So there's a kind of a weird thing where when Brazil first got released in New Zealand and everyone got one, pretty much at the same time that year, everybody's Brazils just started putting out full yellow leaves. And I mean, like, everybody, I saw so many comments, so many posts, all kinds of things, but I always saw that within a few weeks of doing nothing, the plant would just go back to putting out normal variegated leaves. That happened to me as well. My Brazil put about 6 or 7 full yellow leaves. I did absolutely nothing. I didn't change anything. I didn't cut it, nothing. And it just went back to being variegated again, and it hasn't done it since. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing of whether maybe that was something to do with temperature or the season that it did that. I don't know. Other reasons that it could be doing that is it could just be rebooting, so it might not have enough light, or it might be having too much light. If you are getting lots of full yellow leaves, it's recommended to just give it a bit more light. Is another thing that you can do. Another thing is you can just cut it back to the last variegated leaf. So if you have like 4 yellow leaves in a row, you could just cut just before the 4 yellows back to where it was variegated, and this can also help you to then have a better chance of having variegated leaves in the future. So yeah, I know I still haven't really figured out the whole Brazil thing, because I found it really weird that the same thing happened to everybody, and everybody's plants, without doing anything, without changing their light or cutting them, went back to normal. Like, it seemed like it happened to everyone at the same time. So it was really weird. But yeah, but like I said, keep in mind there are other things you can do. Cut it back and or alter how much light it is getting. I will follow that on with another similar thing that I see asked a lot, and it is, a neon pothos has a green splash. Is this normal? Yes, it is normal. It's just a random mutation that happens really frequently for neon pothos. A lot of neon pothos, you see, they will occasionally have a leaf with a green stripe or green speck, or it might be like a quarter of the leaf is green. I'm not really sure why this is, but it seems to just be very common for all neon pothos. So yeah, it's normal. It's just a thing that they do for some reason. Okay, so the next question is, how do I get my plant to be fuller or branch out more? So there are a few different answers to this question. So one way that you can get your plant to be fuller is to cut the growth tip. So if you don't know, the growth tip is just the part of the plant that is growing, hence why it's called a growth tip. So you can just cut the growth tip just below the node, and this can encourage your plant to then put out new growth points further down the stem. So in some cases you might just get one growth point, but in other cases sometimes your plant will put out multiple. So that can be a really good way to encourage your plant to become fuller or to branch out more if you have something like a ficus, for example. So yeah, that is one way that you can do that. And then another thing that you can do is, with that growth tip, you can then propagate it and pop it back into your pot, and then you have a fuller plant. You can also, rather than just cutting the growth tip, you could cut the growth tip and then take a few more cuttings, root them, pop them back into the pot. So the more cuttings that you do, obviously the fuller the plant will be and the more growth points that it has. So that is like my preferred way to do it, although you do then have to be a bit patient because you have to wait for the cuttings to propagate before you can put them back into the pot. So yeah, that's kind of what I am doing. So I have my satin pothos. So I bought one of these from Plant Project, a really big long plant, and I pretty much cut it all the way back to how many leaves you see here, and I now have about 20, I'm going to say 20, about 20 leaves all propagating. So my aim is for them all to propagate and root, and then I'm going to add them back into this pot, and then I'm going to have a really nice full pot of that plant, and that is my aim for that. And I will show you another plant where I have done that. So this guy, for example, so this was only maybe 2 cuttings, so I've just been taking cuttings, rooting them, chucking them back in, taking cuttings, rooting them, chucking them back in. So you can see he is getting a lot more fuller. I do still have some bare spots up here, so my aim is for eventually that you won't be able to see the soil because there will be so many cuttings in there, and then that should help me to create a nice full plant of that, which I really want. Okay, and another plant that I'll just quickly show you as well because I'm pretty proud of how he looks now. So this is my Miranda, one of my Mirandas. So you can see he looks super full and bushy. There's not really any gaps in the pot where you can see the soil. So he was probably 2 growth points, and he got quite long and straggly, and there was heat, you could see all the soil, and I just didn't really like how he was looking. So I pretty much chopped him up and took about 20 cuttings from him, rooted them all, and then popped them back into the same pot together, and now he looks beautiful and bushy and full rather than long and scraggly. If you have seen my Calathea video, I believe in that video he was still looking how he was before, where he was quite long and scraggly, so you will be able to see the difference. Yeah, it's definitely possible. You just need lots and lots of cuttings, the more the better. And what I do sometimes is if I don't have enough cuttings at the time, I'll do as many as I can, prop them, root them, pop them back into the pot. Then when the plant gets a little bit bigger, take a few more cuttings, root them, and then add them, keep adding them into the pot, adding them until I get to kind of like the thickness that I'm happy with. So yeah, that's what I do. But yeah, I just love how he looks now, so much nicer. Okay, so another question that I see asked quite a lot is to do with Calathea. So we all know that they are super duper fussy, so obviously this is a pretty common theme of Calathea, is why the tips of my Calathea crispy. So I'll just show you an example of kind of what I mean. My rattlesnake has a few crispy tips. For the most part he is fine, but you can see that he does have a few leaves where the tips are quite brown and crispy, so that's kind of what I'm sort of talking about. A lot of people have this kind of issue on their Calathea. Most usually it looks kind of like this, so it'll just be the very tip of the plant will be a little bit brown or gold, and it goes a bit crispy like that. So there's a few different reasons. I mean, number one is that Calatheas are just super duper fussy. But yeah, so there can be a few different factors. So one is inconsistent watering. So if they're not getting watered like exactly when they need to be watered, or the right amount of water, then they can get crispy tips. So quite often people say that it is good to keep your Calathea moist. I tried that for a long time and I just was having no luck with it. So now what I do is I let them dry out between watering, because yeah, I had many Calathea die from root rot of trying to keep them moist. It's just such a hard balance to keep them not soaking wet, not dry, but moist. So yeah, I've given up on that and I just let them dry out between waterings. Quite often I will also just notice when their leaves, like for example the Stromanthe or the Freddie that I was talking about earlier, like I said, when they start to get curly leaves like that, then that is a good indication that now is a good time to water. So I kind of stick with that kind of thing. Or if I see that the Calathea is nice and dry, then I will water it as soon as I notice that, rather than for a lot of my other plants, when I see that they're dry, I might give them a couple more days just to be on the safe side. So I just try not to let them stay too dry for too long, but I do let them dry out before I do water them, and I found that to be one of the biggest, most helpful factors in preventing crispy tips. That for this girl, for example, and as you can see, she doesn't have any crispy tips that I can see, and I did that as well for when I had my Calathea Zebrina. I've actually sold it and don't have it anymore, but I was getting so many crispy tips, so that was one of the things that I did, was yeah, just reduce how much I was watering it. Another thing is not enough humidity, so that is a big factor for Calathea. They really like their humidity, so I find that some Calathea are less fussy with this than others. So those Calathea that seem okay and just average amounts of humidity, then I don't really worry about it too much, like this girl for example, or my Freddie even, who's also on this plant shelf. My rattlesnake I'm not like too fussed about, so I don't actually mind the crispy tips on him. But I have a few other Calathea that I just always keep them in my bathroom because it's just so that they have that extra humidity, and that also helped a lot with a lot of the crispy tips. And the last thing that you can do as well is with what you're using to water them. So Calathea or pre-plant species can be a little bit more fussy than most plants which don't actually care that much. But Calathea seem to be quite sensitive to any chemicals that are in the water. So here in New Zealand, obviously our water is pretty clean and it doesn't really have that many chemicals, but there are still a few. And so what I do as well is I only water my pre-plants with either rainwater, so we collect rainwater, so I've pretty much always got a constant supply of rainwater, or if we don't have any rainwater, if I don't know, it hasn't rained for a long time and we've run out, for example, I have a little distilling water jug that I bought from, I think it was the warehouse, and I use that to distill the water and water my plants with that. The only downside with that is that you do need to get a filter, and each filter only lasts a month, and it's about $30 for 2 of them, I believe, so it is quite expensive, so I try not to use that unless I desperately need to. Another thing that people suggest is that you can just leave your water, like put your water in a jug or a cup or something and leave it out for a couple of nights before you use it to water your plant. Supposedly this helps reduce how much chemicals are in the water, although I don't really understand how that works, so I've never tried it because I don't know, to me it doesn't seem like it would work. But anyway, this is some advice that I quite often see suggested on Facebook, so whether it works or not I don't know, but you could give it a try. Cool. Another very common question asked on Facebook is, why are there mushrooms growing in my soil and is it bad? So the answer is that no, it's not bad. So if you get little mushrooms growing up in your soil in your pots, then that's actually a sign that your soil is really, really healthy. So you often get those mushrooms growing when you have like pretty ideal soil. So it's actually a really good sign when you see that. Then you can go, oh, actually my soil is like really healthy and happy. And it's up to you whether you want to keep them or not. You can just get rid of them if you would like, but some people suggest that it is good to just keep them in there, because what the mushrooms do is that they can get rid of any like dead debris in the soil, like dead roots, for example, dead bugs, and they break it all down into organic matter. It's almost like they help compost the soil for you, and then they give the nutrients back, put the nutrients back into the soil. So it's, if you get mushrooms, yeah, don't worry about it, it's all good. If you don't like the look of it, then yeah, like I said, just like pinch them off or whatever. Yeah, you can leave them and they're not going to do any harm to your plant. In fact, they're just going to probably help it. Okay, and my second to last question is, what is this white stuff all over my soil? So hopefully I'll have a picture here of what I'm talking about, but this is quite a common question that I see, and I've had it happen too. Yeah, basically what it is it's just like a fungus and it's growing on your soil. So it's not, the fungus itself isn't really going to harm your plant in any way. When I see it, I normally just get like a, I don't know, a skewer or something, and I just like mix it all up into the soil, and then that's all good. Or you could just scoop off the top little layer of your soil where you've got that fungus and then replace it with some fresh soil. So that's 2 things that you can do. But while the fungus isn't bad necessarily, it's not going to harm your plant, it is a sign that you might not have enough airflow, or you might be overwatering. So yeah, normally that fungus will grow if the soil has been wet for too long. So if I do see that in my pots, like I said, I just mix it in, and then I just am really careful about how much I'm watering that plant, because then that's to me a good indication that I'm probably overwatering it a little bit. So I'll just reduce my watering a bit and just be more wary of that. The other thing is it can also be caused by a lack of airflow, and probably in most cases it's both of these things, the watering and airflow. Basically, yeah, if you can also get that fungus when there's just not enough airflow, for that plant. So sometimes this happens if you don't have the soil like right up to the top of the pot, so you might have a gap between the top of the pot and the soil. That can prevent some airflow, because obviously the airflow is just going straight over the top of the pot, it's not going down into the pot and reaching that soil. And then also obviously you might just find that you need to open a window or open a door more often, put a fan on if it's summertime. Yeah, so it's just an indication that probably the air is a little bit stale. So for me, all of my plants live in the one room because I only have one room. But yeah, if I'm seeing that in a lot of plants, I'm gonna just reduce my watering a little bit, especially for those plants, and then I'll just make sure that I'm opening the door during the daytime, or I'm opening the windows near those plants. And another thing that you can also do as well is that some people recommend is you can just sprinkle some cinnamon on the top of the soil. So once you've mixed that mold, I should say, it's not really fungus, it's a mold. So once you've mixed that mold in, then you can just sprinkle some cinnamon over the top of the soil, because cinnamon actually has antibacterial properties, so it can prevent it from coming back again as well. Okay, and we are up to our very last question. I don't actually think I've seen this question asked very much on social media, which I'm actually surprised about, but I thought I would include it because my friend recently asked me this question and she doesn't really know anything about indoor plants. She's just kind of learning. I gave her a few plants to propagate and she was asking me some questions, and I thought, you know, that's actually like a really good question, because if you don't know about plants, you're not gonna know what that is. So anyway, the question is, what are these weird things growing off my plant? I'll show you some examples. So just on my Brazil, I'm just trying to find you an example. Okay, here. This is what she was talking about when she was asking me this question. So you can see that it's got these little thingies coming off of the node. Another really good example on my Campo, because he has got some mega ones. So the answer to that question is these are called Ariel Roots. So Ariel Roots, so he has got some major Ariel Roots. So Ariel Roots are basically roots that come off of the nodes that usually aren't in the soil. They're slightly different from your normal roots. When you're propagating your plant, you can get aerial roots and you can get actual roots. So aerial roots basically are roots that grow out of the soil, and what their kind of purpose is that they absorb the moisture in the air. So rather than taking up the moisture in the soil, they're taking up some of the moisture in the air. So if you have a plant in a very humid environment, like this guy is, for example, which is probably why his aerial roots are so long, then quite often you see that they will pop out aerial roots, and they usually get even longer, bigger aerial roots when they are in a humid environment, because they are just sucking up all of that moisture in the air, because there's probably going to be a lot. And another thing that aerial roots do is they also, in the wild, they would use their aerial roots to help them kind of climb up other trees or bark or stumps or whatever is there. So they kind of, yeah, just they kind of attach onto things and climb up, and just to give them some support. So this guy had some pretty big aerial roots, actually gone way bigger. So obviously what I did was I gave him a fern fibre pole for support, because I saw that he had these big aerial roots. So that to me was a signal that, hey, I really want to climb. So now I've given him something to climb, and these aerial roots are attaching onto the fern fibre. So this is like, actually though, some of them are actually pretty like on there. So I'm going to have to very carefully detach them when I want to upgrade this guy's pot or his pole. So yeah, that is what those things are if you see them. Another thing of note is that when you do give something like this something to climb up, they're more likely to produce bigger leaves because they have some support, whereas if they are just trailing and they don't have any support, then their leaves quite often will grow a lot smaller. So my Brazil, for example, is a good one, because a lot of the leaves at the base here are quite big, so you can see how big the leaves can be. But because I've just got him trailing, a lot of the newer leaves are quite small in comparison, and that is just simply because I have him trailing rather than climbing up. And just as a side note, again, this is another example of a plant where I have just shoved so many cuttings in there. There's so many, and I've also pinned him a lot as well. So he's pinned and he's got cuttings, and so I'm getting like a nice full top, which I like. That is all of the questions that I have. Cool, you guys know the drill. Thanks for watching, and please hit the like button and also subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.